Okay, sorry about that. I don't know what happened. So here, and just to let you all know that this is now being recorded. So if anybody misses or has to leave early, we can go back and see it if need be. So this is when he went to Haida Gwaii to erect the pole. So Reed's creation of the Skagate dogfish pole in 1978 marks a period of cultural significance for both Reed and the community. While the community provided lodging and food on occasion, Reed personally funded the project and viewed the pole as a potlatch gift. He described it as his way of giving back to the community. It's a gesture of thanks on my part to all the great carvers and all the people who supported them in the past. For the last 8,000 years, at least, people have been carrying on the art of the Haidas on these islands. And it is in that heritage that he drew onto whatever little things that he had been able to perpetuate this great gift in such a form. So the people in the community who lived in the community did not initially take an active interest in Reed's pole as it was being carved. However, at the day of its raising approached, the elders were consulted and a 2-day potlatch was organized. Keep in mind that I had been saying at the beginning of when we started talking about Bill Reed that he was living a kind of situation where the members of the Haida community at the beginning didn't accept him as Haida because he had been living as quote unquote white for all of his life. And he was also feeling not a member of the quote unquote white community because of his physical appearance. And so he was living a kind of double diaspora in that sense. So at the beginning, when he tried to enter the community and he had this idea for the raising of the totem pole, people were a little bit standoffish in the community, and only now it's saying that only once the date of erecting the pole was coming close did the elders really start considering what was happening here and the importance of it, and opening up their ideas and their minds to the project and to Reed, for which they organized the potlatch. So 1,500 native and non-native guests honored the occasion, and for the first time in a generation, the people of the community came together to sing, dance, and potlatch openly. So this was like a huge move in the right direction, and a reawakening of community and tribal customs and traditions. So with the raising of the dogfish pole, Reed's Haida name, Ijuas, was which had been given to him in 1954, was publicly confirmed. He was continuing his work as an artist and activist in support of the Haida people and their culture, leaving a significant impact on the vitality of the Haida nation.
Erin, excuse me, do you want to go full screen?
Yeah, I was just worried to go full screen because that was where it was freezing on me, but we'll try.
Okay, don't worry about it then. Don't worry about it.
Okay, we're good for now. Okay, so Bill Reed's return to the West Coast, because he had been traveling for a while, and at this point when he returned, it coincided with significant personal reckoning. So in the time that he was gone, he had started having some health trouble, and in 1973 was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. So the primary symptom was uncontrollable shaking, and even though that could be temporarily sort of helped with medication, it without a doubt took a huge toll on his artistic practice. So during this period, he took a break on carving with very small sculptures and went on to printmaking because he could control the printmaking more with his movements. So this is an example of his Haida Beaver from 1979. So this was a print on paper. I'm frozen again. You guys, I'm sorry. We're gonna have to not go full screen because my computer's having a problem with it. Let me try and get out again. I'm sorry, I know that this isn't ideal. I don't know if it's my connection today, but this wasn't happening last week. Okay. One of Bill Reed's most iconic large scale images was this sculpture that we see here, The Raven and the Fish and the First Men from 1980. It first emerged as a diminutive yet fully formed masterpiece cradled in the palm of his hand. So if you remember when we looked at the gold box from last week, I was talking about the fact that in the years around the Expo 67 in Montreal, he had made two small carvings. One of them that would become the large scale sculpture at the Vancouver Aquarium, and the other one, which is now this one, which stands in Vancouver in the Museum of Anthropology. So the narrative foregrounds of the Raven, the well-known Haida trickster who created the Haida Gwaii and its first humans. So while multiple versions of this creation story have been passed down, the one Reed interprets involves the Raven releasing humans from a clamshell found on the beach. In doing so, Reed gave himself some creative flexibility, stating that it was a version of the Raven myth for today, not for the time when it was created. He saw the Raven as a completely self-centered, uninvolved bringer of change, who through inadvertence and accident represented the individualistic and diverse society of the current days. So the Raven discovering mankind in a clamshell reveals like a playful sense of humor for this creation story. The characters emerging from the clamshell display a range of reactions to their new world, including wonder, fear, and perhaps even rejection. You can see that the faces of the individuals who are coming out of the clamshell all have different expressions on their face. And in one case, we even see a rear end rather than a face. So there's a little bit of humor going on there. So now we're going to move on to Kinojwak Ashivak. So Kinojwak Ashivak was one of Canada's most acclaimed graphic artists. Her long list of achievements and honors is surpassed only by her stamina and good humor. So she was the one that was a quote from her biography on her website. And so she was the first well-known printer in the Inuit community. So she was born on South Baffin Island at a camp area known as Ikirasak, and she grew up traveling from camp to camp on the South Baffin and the Arctic, like Nunavik region. So as a young woman, she was married and lived with her husband, who also was an artist, and they moved around as a nomadic community. And only later on in life did they actually settle down and stay in one place. So as she was creating her art pieces, she actually got to work with a lot of different printmakers. She would do the engravings, and different studios would print for her. And she eventually, in conjunction with another group of artists, developed their own Inuit printing studio. So this, which is the Enchanted Owl from 1960, which actually used on a postage stamp in the 1970s to commemorate the centennial of the Northwest Territories. It's a spotted blue-gray owl gazing out to the viewer, and the feathers fanning out above its head are curving up from its tail. And you can see that there's the little signature on the right-hand side there. So many different versions of this owl were actually created. The nice thing about engraving and using it to print is that you can do different colors thereafter. So this one, which was the famous one on the stamp, which I actually have a copy of, was then printed in various different colors depending on where it was being exhibited. But it was actually the first print that became known nationwide as a popular print from an Inuit artist. And if you go into different stores, like I was just in a store last week in the West Island where they sell some, indigenous art pieces like tote bags and such. And I saw that this image was printed on a tote bag that they had on display. So it's very iconic when it comes to Inuit art from Canada. So this was a piece that she did to commemorate their land. So it's called Our Land. So she writes, when I first picked Nunavut, our land, to write about for Nunavut Day, I didn't realize that it was going to be such a big deal, as she wrote. But it ended up being a very, very popular image in Canadian art as well. So if you look, it has so on the one side, you have a print of the daytime, and on the other side, you have a print of the nighttime and all of the different things associated with each time of day. So you can see that they have the igloos, the camp of the nomadic tribe, and the various different animals that are coming around. And it's done in a circular motion to give the notion of a continuous day to night kind of motion and flow, and the fact that it keeps going. So interesting, she actually made more than one print to commemorate the creation of Nunavut. This work is often confused with another one of her works because they're quite similar. And she states that only she understands and sees the difference in between the two prints. But if anybody, like the viewer, was just looking at it, it's very hard to tell the difference because she uses all the same colors even. So here I just wanted to show you some examples. So in her career, the various different prints that she's done, she does like a myriad of different kinds of owls. She associates herself as the owl. So she sees these all as a kind of variations of self-portraits. So you see that there's the different versions of each owl: the guardian owl, the summer owl, the autumn owl, the illustrious owl. So it's different moods of owls, if you will, but all in different prints. And if you go onto different Inuit gallery sites, she still has, I mean, she's passed now, but she still has her prints are still very actively selling today. So here, if you just want to read the little caption on the right-hand side. So throughout her career, she worked with a bunch of different kinds of medium, like she would do pencil drawings, colored pencil drawings, just graphite. She would use pen and ink. She would do engravings, and use them all for different kinds of prints as well. But towards the end of her career, she started to dabble into stained glass, and she was commissioned on this project to work with Kingate Studios and the Appleby College in Oakville, Ontario, for a project that marked the first Inuk artist to design for the medium. So over the course of several months, she proceeded to work closely with stained glass artists Sue Obata and Norbert Sattler to realize her visionary design in glass. So the idea is that she created the sketches for the design, she created the idea for the design, and then worked in conjunction with these stained glass artists to create the piece for the for Appleby College in the chapel. So just a beautiful piece. And here is another piece within the same chapel, but a smaller window. So both of them, the last one and this one, have the owl again as the main figure, but then this one has the fish as well. The idea of the blue, the light blue is the sky, and the idea of the dark blue is obviously the water. So now we're going to move to Carl Beam. I just wanted to know, as we're moving forward, if anybody had any questions on Bill Reed or on Kinojak before we moved on. You can either ask it directly to me by turning on your microphone, or you can put it in the chat if you'd like. No? All right. So Carl Beam is kind of the artist who bridges into contemporary Indigenous art, because of the fact that he was the first artist to sell a piece to the first contemporary Indigenous artist whose work was acquired by the National Gallery of Canada. So he was one of Canada's most groundbreaking Indigenous artists. So he was the daughter of a chief of Ojibwe on his mother's side, and his father was white Canadian. So in 1980, Beam and his family moved to New Mexico to live and work there for a little while. And although they lived there, he wanted to come back and do some schooling in Canada. So he finally returned to Canada in 1983, moving to Peterborough, Ontario. So in 1984, the Thunder Bay Art Gallery commissioned a major work by Carl Beam. The result was this piece called Exorcism, an elaborate multimedia work that extends over 6 meters in length. So colored in a fierce, angry red, the piece includes 3 Indigenous men dressed in Western clothes, and someone dressed in traditional clothes, and a big raven, as you can see. The surface is scored and written all over it. At the unveiling of the work to the public, Beam had archers shoot arrows at the painting from across the gallery, and axes were embedded in its surface. The evident violence of exorcism is directed toward exorcising the enduring impact of European colonization on Indigenous life and culture. Exorcism was included in a solo exhibition in 1984 called Alter Egos. It was a multimedia exhibition by Carl Beam. So most of Carl Beam's work is all multimedia, which, if you're not kind of familiar with the term, means that there's different mediums that are used to create it. So there's he uses some photographs. He does like assemblage, like gluing pieces onto the canvas. He then paints over, in this case, he had people shooting arrows. That was part of the performance to complete the piece. So it just means there's various different mediums that are used to create the one piece all together. So here, this is probably Carl Beam's most extensively known piece, called the North American Iceberg. So another closely related work from the same kind of period. This is 1985. And in 1986, this is the piece that became the first work of a contemporary Indigenous artist to be purchased by the gallery. So like exorcism, North American iceberg, which is executed on a large sheet of plexiglass rather than canvas, is splattered with bleeding red paint over old archival images of Indigenous people, self-portraits, and texts, one of which reads, "Ignored, the force moved, unsung, because it is so real. Into the real, it knows flash to light." The North American iceberg is an angry, defiant work, but the force is which are the texts, speaks to the points of the inevitability of justice and the ultimate redemption of Indigenous culture from destruction caused by colonialism. So you can see just in little bits of the text that they're not really congruent in the sense that they don't really go together. They're bits and pieces, but every piece of text is written in a different color, or is printed in a different color so that it catches your attention and forces your eye to move around the piece and look at every element individually and as a whole. And that, so in the middle where you see the face, the profile, and then the head on facing to us, that is the self-portrait of Carl Beam. So this one is called the Columbus Project from 1989 to 1992. So between those years, Beam created a body of work entitled The Columbus Project, raising a wide variety of issues surrounding the celebration of the 500th anniversary of Columbus's arrival to the Americas. So we see here that Gan Dancers, which is a photo emulsion of a hooded, shirtless man standing in front of a cross set in a wooden cabinet. Like this isn't just a bad shot of the piece. It's a very, very faded piece. It's meant to look that way. The idea is for it to look like old newspaper or magazine clipping that is very faded. But what we would have seen with splattered red paint in his previous images is now kind of splattered white paint. So the idea is that the idea of colonialism is being whitewashed by the 500th anniversary of Columbus's arrival to the Americas. So like that was something that was being celebrated. And Beam's commentary here is that you're whitewashing the colonialism and the genocide aspect of it by celebrating it instead. So it juxtaposes an image of Columbus with that of Sitting Bull, an American $5 bill between them, all of it half erased by splashes, like I said, of streaming white paint. It was exhibited at the Art Gallery of Peterborough and the Power Plant in Toronto, as well as internationally. So the Columbus Chronicles is one of many works that combines historic images and text with modern print techniques. And he became known for this multimedia type of process, and his work is recognized for that internationally. This is just another version of one of his sort of photo emulsions and mixed media pieces. This is later in his career in 2002. So this contrasts brightly colored images of Indigenous people with images from the moon landing and of Albert Einstein, suggesting the degree to which modern technology has distanced us from the natural world. So you can kind of, or not kind of, you can very evidently see the tradition of his work, the way that he builds images on canvas or on plexiglass or whatever surface he's working on, and it really becomes like a storyboard. He's telling a story of colonialism versus the old world and his people, and the effects that that colonialism has had on natural life. So that will show the end of our Indigenous art section, and now we'll be moving into religious art and architecture. So if you look at,
Erin,
yes,
sorry, Erin, can I just ask a question?
yeah, of course.
Do you know why Indigenous art is so well known and promoted out west, but not in the east? Would you have any idea why it sort of connects to the west coast more than the east?
I think that Haida art and West Coast art is more well known. It's more recognizable, and because of a lot of that, it is more celebrated. And there was a lot more honestly, Bill Reed had a huge impact on how much of a display and how much visual they get from the media and from it's also a question of tourism as well. But as I was saying last week, Bill Reed worked for the CBC, and because of that, he was a very prominent figure, and so he got a lot of attention. And the idea of re-erecting those kinds of, like, the dogfish pole and events like that really played into them getting re-recognized again. And I think that the culture is just a lot more open to it out on the West Coast, because it's a lot more evident. There's a lot more. I mean, Emily, who is on with us, you can speak Dutch because she grew up on the West Coast.
Yeah, I don't know. I would hazard a guess, and this is just also given that I've lived both in Quebec and BC and Alberta, that the West Coast is a younger colonized area, right? So as opposed to Ontario and Quebec, which are the longest standing colonized areas in Canada. So I don't know if it's necessarily how we see and treat our Indigenous peoples in where we are in Canada. And again, this might be a very I know it's a very touchy subject, but I think it's a younger area in the West. So I don't know.
Yeah,
there might be these same long-standing. Not that the West Coast has anything. There's lots of atrocities that happen there as well, as we all know. But I don't know. I think the celebration is more apparent because of.
I think that definitely plays into it. As you were saying, so like, the first Europeans made contact, like in the East Coast, yes, in Nova Scotia, like as early as like the late 1600s type thing. And it took until the mid 1800s for them to make contact on the West Coast. So by the time they had reached there, I guess that leaves about 150-ish more years for them to hold their ground too, So like there was a lot more art that had already been established that didn't have that sort of erasing or that sort of standstill that the East Coast did. But I also do think that that artists such as Bill Reed did play a huge role in sort of reintegrating the visual culture of things like of imagery from Haida Gwaii into mainstream visual culture, and not just as a separate art form. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And,
thank you.
There is representation in Ontario, there's representation in Quebec, there's representation in across the prairies and on the East Coast as well. But I do think that when we think of the West Coast, our mind and our visual mind also goes directly to that kind of imagery, where we don't readily see that kind of imagery so much around us in Quebec.
Yeah.
It's also, the West Coast is more, isn't it a more artsy fartsy kind of an area than
No.
like California?
Well, I
No?
think you have, I mean, like, I think that the art has traveled a lot outside of the West Coast. Like, as Erin said, like you become, you recognize it because it has traveled so far, in the sense, like, I think a lot of people have been attracted to the West Coast for, you know, as long as
Yeah.
people have been able to travel there, it's a very popular holiday destination. So you have people coming from all over that are discovering this art and then are bringing it back to wherever they came from. And so,
And I mean,
also,
yeah, and it has a kind of like like an exotic like draw to it. Do you know what I mean? When for tourists, like it's that exoticism that draws people. But what we're gonna see when we like as we move forward into this next section, which is religious art and architecture, really the heart of religion in Canada is like the Roman Catholicism of Quebec. So because Quebec is like the heart of the archdiocese, the Catholic archdiocese in the country, the more religion you have in one area, the less imagery that you're going to have of things like totem poles and like people who are things that are valuing other outlooks on God and different religions. You know what I mean? Because of the fact that it's so very Catholic in Quebec.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. Great conversation, everyone. So here, like I said, we're going to go into religious art and architecture. And as I was looking for examples, I really felt that it made the most sense to concentrate on architecture of the religious architecture of the churches around Montreal and Quebec, because they really are the best examples of religious art and architecture in the country. So just want to make sure for now that everybody else has their microphones off, unless you have a question. So I can still hear a microphone on. I'm not sure who it is. Just have a look. So the first we're going to start with is Notre Dame de Quebec Basilica Cathedral. So this is probably the most extensively expanded and transformed structure in Canada's history, and that is still dedicated to its original purpose. So Notre Dame de Quebec Church was built originally in 1647. So think about how long ago that was. That not only had Europeans made contact, but that they were already building religious buildings to establish themselves and to establish the religion in the new colony. It was given the name Notre Dame de la Paix originally. It was the first church to be made of stone in the city. In 1664, it became the first church north of New Mexico dedicated to Notre Dame of the Immaculate Conception. When the Quebec City Diocese was constituted in 1674, it became the cathedral of its first bishop, Saint François de Laval. 200 years later, Pius IX declared it a basilica, which is a church privilege because of the important number of pilgrimages it draws. So in 2023, Pope Francis came to meet with the representatives of the Canadian Church as part of his pilgrimage. So I didn't even know that about this church. But it is really the oldest and most important church in all of Canada because of its pilgrimages. Well, I mean, I'm sure that some churches in Montreal would have something to argue about that, but the literature says that it is the most significant because of the fact that it is the oldest. So with strong European roots, the Notre Dame de Quebec parish is the ancestor of all Catholic parishes that have spread across Canada and the United States, which is huge, right? So the church was bombarded and burned in 1759 during the British siege, and then rebuilt according to the original plans. Various parts or decorative components were added during the following decades, and it burned once again in 1922 and was rebuilt using the old plans for a second time. So these are photos from 1922 of the second time that it burned. Think about all of the money put into the church to be built, burned, built again, burned again, built again. Unreal. From 1650 to 1898, some 900 people were buried under the cathedral. When the cathedral was rebuilt again in 1923, this crypt was added. Most of the bishops, archbishops, and cardinals of the Quebec diocese in the crypt, as well as 4 governors of New France, which were Frontenac, Vaudreuil, Tallière, and Jonquière. So think about how important those names are in Quebec history, and that you see them virtually everywhere that you go, anywhere in Quebec. Whether there's regions, street names, rivers, whatever it may be, very important people buried in those crypts. That crypt, I should say, sorry. So obviously here you're looking at it from one end to the other and then the opposite. The church's main features are its neoclassical facade with its 2 asymmetrical towers, its stained glass windows, and 3 cassavant organs, as well as the chancel golden sculptures, including a splendid baldachin. I never know how to pronounce that word, baldachin, which is what we see the archway here, the golden archway, designed and built by François Bélarger, who is a famous French-Canadian painter, sculptor, and architect. It's supported by the chancel walls and stands on sculptures representing angels, which gives the impression it floats above the main altar. So usually you would have those arches coming down on pillars that would go down and like right to the ground. But what makes this special is the fact that it sits on those sculptures along the wall. So it almost is like the same idea of like what you would like when you see like flying buttresses in a church, the fact that the dome or that the top doesn't seem to be supported by anything on the ground is what makes this so special. The stained glass windows were designed by the Meyer House in Munich and the Champignol House in Paris. So here you have an old photo from 1872. Now you'll see that the structure was still there. But if you go back, I mean, obviously one's in color and one's in black and white. But when they say that they rebuilt to the same plans, like everything was really done meticulously to make it look exactly what it was like originally. So this photo is by Notman and Sons, so William Notman's studio. I'm sure you've heard the name William Notman, and as you'll see as we move forward, he was an incredibly prominent figure in Canadian art history in the sense that he took many photographs, but also his studio was where a lot of photographs were printed and developed. And you know, originally this is a gelatin silver glass plate negative. We'll see different examples of the ways that he used photography throughout the years to evolve with the times. And a lot of his photographs or examples of his work can be found at the McCord Museum in Montreal, which is interesting because the McCord isn't an art history museum. that's where, when we were talking last week, that the boundaries of where history ends and where art history begins and vice versa, it's sometimes kind of blurry. So this is another of his pieces on gelatin silver glass plate negative of the front entrance of the cathedral. This one from 1890, so this would have been before the second fire. So this church in Quebec is considered to be a holy door. So it states that during our lives, every door represents a passage. They are transitions from one place to another, a change of environment, or sometimes we move from the past to the future. These doors represent a rupture. So as a significant symbol of spiritual experience, the holy door, which is what this is referred to, offers the opportunity to collect lost parts of our life. By going through the various stages and transitions of his own living, one can find his current yearnings and discover that he is truly looking for. This is the diocese, like that I'm paraphrasing, that they've written this in association with the Holy Door experiences, as they call it. Here, pilgrims will commune with people who are precious to them, specifically family members, close ones, or people who are just like them, facing closed doors of their life looking to open. So we're invited to pass through this holy door from the outside to the inside as if we're trying to enter our own self. We are looking for the meaning of our future in order to pinpoint the essential values. This is a quest for sense. So this is written by Monsignor Denis Bélanger, the rector of the cathedral. So this is it's a pilgrimage door. So the holy door is a real door pierced in the wall of the chapel of the Sacred Heart, which is on the north side of the cathedral. The Holy See granted Notre Dame de Quebec an extraordinary privilege when authorizing its construction. So jubilees are years of remission or indulgence or reconciliation, conversion, sacramental penance. The purpose of the Holy Door is to be open and accessible to all during these holy jubilee years as symbols of the paths leading to conversion and blessings. Jubilees normally take place every 25 years, but a pope can announce one when deemed appropriate. Interestingly, the next opening of the Holy Door will underline an exceptional anniversary in 2024, which is the 350th anniversary of the foundation of the Quebec diocese. So in 2024, Quebec City and this Basilica Cathedral will get an incredible influx of people, pilgrims coming to pass through this holy door. So you can see, like, this is the front view, and then this is the relief of Jesus's face here. So the Jubilee of the 350th anniversary of the foundation of Quebec will be proclaimed on December 8th, 2023, during the feast day of the diocese, and will last one whole year. During that year, the Catholic Church of Quebec will welcome groups from all over the world coming as pilgrims here, in the land, like on the land where the church in America was born and grew. So this is like huge for the Catholic religion, for the city of Quebec, for the country of Canada. Sorry if anyone just wants to look at that for one more minute. Also, just because I was reading all about it, because I had no idea about the Holy Door and that existed in Quebec. So I started researching it as I was creating the curriculum for the course. And if anybody is like interested in going there, you know, anybody who is interested in going there, they don't take any reservations. And they said that lineups to see this door, to pass through it, can take like days. Okay, Notre-Dame de Bon Secours Chapel in Montreal. So this is the Notre-Dame de Bon Secours Chapel in Old Montreal. You can see on the left that this is current day, and on the right we have another silver glass plate negative from the Notman studio, because they were the ones who did all of the photography in the day. And this is considered a historic and heritage gem. So it was built from 1771 to 1773, and it occupies the very place of the first pilgrimage chapel, the remains of which have been recently discovered underneath the chapel that lies there today. So this is the interior of the chapel. It's not huge. As soon as you enter, you will see two works by Ozias Le Duc that adorn the back wall of the chapel. One on one side, there is Paul de Champmedy de Maisonneuve, the co-founder of Montreal, who granted the land for the chapel. And on the other, Marguerite Bourgeois, the first teacher and founder of the congregation of Notre Dame, who as early as 1655 rallied the first settlers to her plan to build a pilgrimage chapel outside the city walls. This dream finally materialized in 1675 with the erection of a first stone chapel, the one that they recently discovered underneath. After a second trip to France in 1672, Marguerite brought back a small wooden statue of Notre Dame de Bon Secours that can still be seen in the left side altar of the chapel, which is right at the front there. Here's a bit of a better view. So this chapel is actually the cradle of the English-speaking Catholic community in Montreal. 6 years after the fall of Montreal to the English, Notre Dame de Bon Secours welcomes new faithful among the Irish and Scottish families of the British troops. It is from this community that funds are raised to build St. Patrick's Church, which is now St. Patrick's Basilica, the English-speaking parish in Montreal. You'll see that this is also considered to be the sailors' chapel. So you see here that there's a bunch of little hanging boats. So there's some like red bronze colored ones, and there's one that looks like a little bit gold. So as the port expanded in the 19th century, the chapel became a popular place of prayer for sailors. The miniature ships hanging from the vault of the chapel recall their faith in Notre Dame de Bon Secours. There's a close-up of one of the boats. Beautiful detail in each one of them. So again, this is the chapel found underneath. So during the various excavations that took place in 1996, 97, archaeologists made many discoveries. But what was the most interesting, you see in the top left-hand corner here, you can see that they've built sort of like walkways throughout the excavated site in the basement. And on the bottom, the big image, they have glass cases of sculptures and artifacts that were found during the excavation, as well as sculptures up on the pedestals there. So this site is still a place of active archaeological research. They did another excavation in 2005, 2015, 2019, and they continue to uncover artifacts from the 1600s. So this is like kind of, it's part of the Marguerite Bourgeois Museum. So if you go to the Marguerite Bourgeois Museum, you can also gain access to the archaeological site underneath the chapel. And there's also, for those of you who may not want to go in person, they have the option of doing an online virtual tour of the chapel and of the archaeological site underneath. So here we're going to move on to St. Patrick's Basilica. So we had, I mentioned in the previous slides that, so the Notre Dame de Bon Secours chapel was the site for the English speaking members of the Catholic community in Montreal. And through that parish, they raised funds to then start the build of the St. Patrick's Basilica, which became the true home of the Irish and English in Montreal. So in 1888, Mark Twain visited Montreal and wrote, "This is the first time I was ever in a city where you couldn't throw a brick without breaking a church window." Nicknamed the City of Saints, Montreal is home to 4 basilicas, 6 cathedrals, and a total of over 300 churches. In addition to St. Patrick's Basilica, the city's most iconic church, basilica, there's also the St. Joseph's Oratory and Notre Dame de Bon Secours Chapel, so for the English speaking members. So this is the old front facade. And to the right, the one that stands, well, with any updated changes today. So St. Patrick's Church was opened on March 17th, 1847 to serve the needs of the Irish immigrants who had come to Montreal in great numbers due to the famine and other troubles. The church was built in the Gothic revival style on a sort of elevated area overlooking the city of Montreal. Its spire could be seen by all. Over the years, the city grew north, east, and west, and to which the result of the church is now surrounded by modern day Montreal. And actually, if you kind of walked by it, it's on a side street, right? So you don't really see it. It's not one of the big attractions that you see in Montreal in plain sight. So it was raised to the status of minor basilica by His Holiness Pope John Paul II in 1989 because of its historical importance as the mother church of the English-speaking Catholics of Greater Montreal. It recently underwent its 4th major restoration at the cost of $5 million, which was paid for by the provincial government. And it is now designated a historical monument by the government of Quebec, as well as a natural historic site by the government of Canada.
So what street is it on?
It is on, oh, I know this. Is it in my notes? Hold on a second, let me look.
It says René Lévesque, but that's not what it, the
No, but
address is René Lévesque.
it's partially on
St. Alexander and trying to find the other side.
Yeah, I think it is St. Alexander. It's St. Alexander and René Lévesque, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can see
Yeah.
it off of René Lévesque.
The back is on René Lévesque and the front is on St. Alexander, isn't it?
Yes, I think you're right.
Yeah,
The back is on René Lévesque.
yeah.
I think, anyway, you can see it clearly from René Lévesque if you walk along René Lévesque.
So it was constructed from the years of 1843 to 47. as the Parish Church of Montreal's growing immigrant population. And as soon as the church was completed, its clergy helped care for Irish immigrants suffering from a typhoid fever epidemic. Due to its continuing religious, charitable, and educational locations, it became the heart of the Irish community in Montreal. It's also the resting place, well, it was the funeral of Thomas D'Arcy McGee in 1868. So here's the interior. So the basilica is it's an example of French Gothic revival style in Canada. The revival style was based on extensive studies into the 13th century French architecture carried out by French scholars. We see the designers of the basilica, which were architect Pierre-Louis Morin and the Jesuit priest Félix Martin, incorporated the use of French Gothic revival style in the building. Both had previous knowledge of Gothic and French medieval architecture through practices and through relationships like with the style from other sculpture and architecture. So it has an opulent green and gold forest-like interior, befitting of the whole idea of Ireland and St. Patrick's. The interior features remarkably complete examples of Quebec ecclesiastical craftsmanship and artistry. It was originally decorated in 1845 through 51, and additions were made twice later in the century. The initial decoration was supervised by Victor Bourgeot, Antoine Plamondon, who is a significant name in Canadian architectural history, and visual art. And he created the paintings of the Stations of the Cross, and the main altar and two side altars were also carved by Perrault, Paré, and Willette. So probably the most interesting facet of the church are that its pillars, the pillars that support the arches that look like just marble at first glance, are actually beams from white oak trees that were stripped of their bark, bound together, and then encased in marble. You can kind of see them on the sides on the left-hand image. It's the better view, nave. So key elements which relate to the heritage value of St. Patrick's Basilica include its large-scale seating for over 1,700 people, which, considering the size of the building, is quite a lot. Its construction materials that were used are limestone, copper, the roof is copper, and the ceiling is wood carpentry. So one of the things, you know, if you're not familiar with all the different styles of architecture, one thing that like makes it Gothic when you look at this, so Gothic, you'll see like at the front here too, like it's very pointy. Like you see that the spire is very pointed, and then in here you kind of have at the front altar, it looks very resemblant to what you saw outside on the front facade. Again, like those points and very articulately decorated archways, skinny archways, those skinny stained glass windows. That's all very Gothic. So soaring height, compact rectangular plan with central nave and side aisles, its circular apse, its facade, structural organization, everything really falls into the idea of the neo-French Gothic style. One other thing that's really interesting about the church is you'll see that the pews are all, they're deep pews, like the backs of them go really high up. That's mimicking, and you see each one of them has like those points on the end. Everything is a mimic of that French Gothic style. So obviously the lighting is different in every picture, but really like this is like the front altar, which is that deep green and gold, is really the central focus of the St. Patrick's Basilica and what it's known for. That's really the viewpoint that you see when you walk in from the back. And I just put this photo in because it gives you an idea of when you're on the altar, how like grandiose it is to look up. And then here you have a view of kind of the whole church, and you can see on the left-hand side, you see the beginning of the Stations of the Cross there. And then this is when you're looking back. So that door and the rose window. So the rose window we saw here. The rose window is the round window that's above the door. Oops. So that would be what you're looking at here. So that's the back of the church. And you see on the right hand, on the top right hand side there, that's all the woodwork. So really amazing craftsmanship with wood that was put into this basilica. And you see the stairs, the rounded staircase there that goes up to the upstairs seating. Again, you see that this gelatin silver glass negative was from the Notman studio. So Notman really being the authority for all things photographic, and particularly church photographic in Montreal at the time. Here's one of the stations of the cross. And I wanted to show this as an example because you see that, so this is like the Annunciation, and then on the bottom you see that there's a small image of the Virgin Mary holding the baby Jesus, and then there's an enlarged example of it on the right hand side. So this is really art that was done in a Gothic style. So when you study, and if you were part of the classes that we did on the Renaissance, right, the proto-Renaissance, which was coming right out of the Gothic era, we saw imagery like this where everything was very two-dimensional and flat, and everything, you know, all of the facial features were very chiseled and pointy. And so this speaks to the fact that the church was done in a neo-Gothic style, because they show imagery like this. And then right above, you have that more classical Renaissance style painting of the version of the Annunciation by Plamondon. Has everyone, like, who here has been to St. Patrick's Cathedral? Does anybody have like a memory from it or something to say of it? I remember when I went to it for the first time, I just thought it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. It's so gorgeous in person. And there's a lot of very important events that take place there. Just Celine Dion did her husband's, when he passed away, she did the funeral there. And there's many important Montrealers who hold their events there. Happy ones and sad ones. Okay, so here we're going to move on to the Notre Dame Basilica de Montréal. So Notre Dame Basilica of Montreal is Montreal's like mother church after like after the Gothic revival style in Canada. So its history has been marked by the Sulpicians since its foundation, and it is inseparable from that of Montreal. So it speaks to its Catholic roots and the eternal link between art and religion. The basilica's style was imitated by several parishes and marked a turning point in religious architectural tradition. So when we think about like English Catholicism versus French Catholicism in Montreal, St. Patrick's is kind of the English, and Notre Dame de Montréal is kind of the French counterpart. So this is an old picture of it from around the 1930s. And it's interesting to see it like that, because when you look at it like this, it looks so much different today, because the city is so much more built up around it. You know, historically, not only because they didn't have, because it cost so much more to build buildings that were that high up, but it was also a question of to do with religion, that they didn't want to build anything that could visually kind of compete with churches. But nowadays with high rises, it's like the churches almost get lost in between them. So here's a more current photo of it. So it was raised to the rank of minor basilica by Pope John Paul II in 1982 and designated also a National Historical Site of Canada in 1989. It is one of the most visited sites in Montreal. The initial phase of the decoration planned by the architect O'Donnell was very different from today's, and it attracted much criticism. In fact, the wall behind the altar, which was very flat as dictated by English Gothic church tradition, had a large window that blinded worshippers by backlighting in the ceremony. So you can see that there in the top left image, again by Notman. You can see that there's the window, the large window behind the altar. So imagine sitting in those pews and trying to watch the service, and there's, you know, a lot of sunlight coming in the windows. It would be quite blinding. Maybe it was meant to be the light of God shining down on you, but I don't think it, but like it said, it drew much criticism. So the Fabrique, under the direction of Pastor Benjamin Victor Rousselot, then decided to redevelop the interior and hired popular Montreal architect Victor Bourgeot for this project. Now you can see on the right-hand side what it looks like today. Very patriotic of Quebec with its blue coloring. But absolutely beautiful. Kind of ironic that the English-speaking community, like St. Patrick's, would be built in Neo-Gothic, French Neo-Gothic, and Notre Dame would be built, which is like the heart of the French-speaking, would be built in English Gothic. Kind of funny. So from 1870 to 1900, Rousselot and Bourgeot worked on a style and symbolism inspired by the Sainte-Chapelle in Paris. I'll just go back here for a second, especially through the use of color, gold leaf motifs on the vault ceiling, and details on the columns. 6 paintings from the old Notre Dame were preserved and added to the current decor, as well as Christ on the Cross, attributed to Paul Jourdain, né Labrosse, hung on the east wall near the entrance. The high altar from the old church was placed in the side chapel dedicated to Saint Marguerite de Youville. The altarpiece that we see, so at the request of Pastor Rousselot, the sanctuary's decoration provides a theological lesson on the Eucharist. The sacrament commemorates Christ's sacrifice and presence in Christian faith. At the very bottom of the altarpiece, there's a high relief of the Last Supper carved on wood. Hard to see from far. Sorry about that picture. And the crucifixion is at the center of the altarpiece, which we can see in the distance. So here we have the chapel of the Notre-Dame du Sacré-Cœur, which was built from 1889 to 1891, according to the plans of the architects Henri Maurice Perrault and Albert Ménard. So it's predominated by a neo-Gothic style. The chapel is typical of late 19th century architectural eclecticism and like a kind of architectural culture and orientalization. It's characterized by woodworked and carved ornaments. So I've actually never seen this part of the basilica. I've only been into the other part of it. And when I started doing the research, I was like floored by how beautiful the adornment and the ornamental like woodwork is in this chapel. It was actually completely destroyed by a fire in 1978, except for one aisle and part of the rood screen. So you can see on the left-hand side, that was the fire, or after the fire. And now this is what it looks like present day. Like, how gorgeous is that? So for optimal preservation of the original elements and the reconstruction of the lower levels, they followed the original plans as much as possible, and a team of craftsmen worked to restore like the soul of the place by reviving the space of the chapel and the bronze altarpiece, which is the focal point, by Charles Daudelin, which we'll see in one moment, and by the addition of a new vault with linden interior finish. The project was guided by drafted by Venice, in 1964 by Venice Charter. So this in the back, we see up top the organ. It's again a Cassavant organ. If from all the churches that I looked through in Montreal, basilicas, cathedrals, what have you, all of the churches, their organs were built by Cassavant, which are the authority of all organs in Montreal, and they do just an absolutely gorgeous job. And it's so beautiful to see how different and exceptional each one is. So this chapel in particular is striking because of all the natural light that it lets in. With something that is this heavy on wood, you need natural light to brighten it, because if not, it would seem extremely dark. So this is the front with that piece by Charles Daudelin. Absolutely gorgeous, all that ornamental piece. And you see all the natural light coming in from the windows and from the like top screen. The light penetrates through the back and sides of it to light up the altarpiece. So this is quite a bit smaller, as you can get an idea from here and from here.
Thank you for sharing these pictures with us. I'm looking at them and obviously it's extremely beautiful, and then very impressed by the craftsmanship. But
Yeah.
also it feels like I'm going back in time, because this is what a cathedral would have looked like when they were first put together. Like you see the oak, you see how blonde
Yeah.
color the oak is, and often when we go into cathedrals in Canada or you know, in Europe, they're very dark, just the wood is aged. So
Mhm.
in a way it feels like you get a chance to see the way it was initially made. So I think that's very, very interesting, because it's much brighter. It looks lighter. Yeah.
It is. You know, what's nice about these days, I mean, it can be kind of deceiving in certain ways, because when you're looking for photos to of the places, you know, it's one thing when you're looking for a photo of a painting to post in a class like this in curriculum, because you're not really going to alter the color of the photos that much depending on like who's taking the photo or where you're sourcing the image from. But when you're taking images of architecture from various different sources, people can play around with the lighting. With like today's technology, you can play around with the lighting and with the color a lot. So it's hard to find images that accurately represent the location that you're trying to show. You know, when I go back to St. Patrick's here, it's like the lighting on this is different than the lighting on this is different than the lighting on this. This one is probably the most natural and accurate. You know, this one is like overexposed, and this one has been like oversaturated. But this image here is quite accurate, and so are these ones. And the color of the wood is so gorgeous in this.
That's what I'm picking up on.
Yeah.
Like it would be a very different experience for the well, obviously the people that you know, use it as a faith space today, but those who first were introduced to the chapel, I think they would have seen it in a very different way. Yeah, thank you.
Mhm. Thank you. So, you know, up until now, we've really just looked at architecture and at architectural and sculptural elements inside the churches, but there's also sort of pre-Confederation. Most of the art that was executed in a documentary or a historical sense to, you know, like Notman's photography. And once photography came into play, then photography was king when it came to most things that were documentary style, trying to capture the history of something or what something looked at a particular point in time. But before photography, and as photography was sort of getting its legs, if you will, there was a lot of documentary painting and sketching that was done. And this would be something of that sort. So this is passed down in Montreal in 1828 by Robert Sproul. And as we can see here, this is an image of when the basilica was being built in front of the old church. So, whoops. So you can see here that they built churches and then sort of rebuilt them bigger and better and knocked down the old ones, which again, as much as fires, was a huge waste of money. But they did these. So originally they had the one that was in Place d'Alme, the Church of Place d'Alme, and then they rebuilt the old one sorry, then they built the new one and they tore down the old one. So before they tore down the old one, it was hard to see the front facade of the new basilica. And if you can imagine it now, if anybody knows Place d'Armes, where that old church was is like an open space now where people, it's like a courtyard where people can sit and either watch the church, or they often have like little events that go on there. So that stayed an open area after that happened. Again, this is from the McCord Museum, if you see on the slide here. And it's really interesting that, you know, this is, it's painting. So why is it in the History Museum and not in an art museum? But like I said, you know, the lines are blurred between one and the other sometimes. Here are some paintings from inside the church. So we have here two of the oldest paintings in the basilica. So on the left is the apparition of the Virgin to Saint Ignatius in the cave of Manresa after Pierre Mignard. And on the right, we have the presentation of the Virgin in the temple after Sébastien Leclerc. Both paintings are anonymous actually, and once appeared in the former Notre Dame Church, dedicated in 1683 and demolished in 1830. They are now placed against the chevet wall of the choir on the right side of the nave when facing the altarpiece. So this being the old church in front, demolished in 1830 after the other one was erected. So these paintings would have been in the old church and brought to the new one. The painting on the left-hand side was commissioned by the Fabrique de Québec painter Maurice Dubois, and it's entitled Our Lady of Canada, since the Virgin is holding a maple leaf in her right hand. The work is displayed on the north wall of the nave near the Chapel of St. Jude. So one thing that was funny that I just wanted to come back to this for, so this painting represents the old and the new. So when the new church, the new basilica was erected, and it was time to knock down the old one, they were actually taking one bell to put it into the old bell to put it into the new church. So they tore down the entire church, the entire old church, but they just kept like the standing bell tower because they still needed it to take the bell down from there to put into the new church. And the only thing that was missing in the new church was the bell tower. So the literature says that it was kind of ironic and funny to see one thing in like standing in front, just a bell tower, and then the other new church with everything but a bell tower before they moved it from one to the other. So this is inside the Blessed Sacrament Chapel above the altar dedicated to Saint Teresa of the Jesus Child. So one can see a sculpture by Elziar Soucy, made in 1928 and representing Saint Therese holding a bunch of roses in her left hand. Behind this sculpture mounted on the wall is a work by Ozias Leduc, Rosier Mystique de Sainte Thérèse de l'Enfant Jésus. So we'll see as we move forward in painting in Canada that Ozias Leduc is a very, very prominent name and figure in Quebec painting. So just keep in mind, I just wanted to show like early examples of his work, but his career spanned over 70 years. So we're going to come back to him after. But he started and finished. Throughout his career, he did a lot of church paintings, but he also did a lot of different kinds of styles. So I just wanted to introduce him to you here, but please keep his name in your head as we will revisit his work later on. On the altar front is another painting by Ozias Leduc, which is Saint Therese of the Child Jesus on her deathbed, which is at the bottom altarpiece there. And then this ceiling piece is also decorated by Ozias Leduc and another prominent figure in Quebec painting, which is Paul-Émile Bourdieu, so another name that we're going to revisit in the future. But look at how beautiful the detail on this ceiling painting is. It reminds me of Van Gogh's Starry Night. You can see like the gold stars, like the gold and the blue, and how they're used to do the different different patterns. And how you see the stars and this swirling almost like gives the impression of like the Milky Way. And then here we have a watercolor by Mary Louisa Lambton Bruce, dated from July 9th, 1838, which is the apse of Notre Dame Church in Montreal from the St. Lawrence River. So we can see Notre Dame under construction here. It's not fully finished. We notice sort of one tower that seems finished and one tower that doesn't seem to be finished, whose construction was completed a few years later, only in 1841 and 1843. So this is one of the reasons why in Quebec art history, the two towers of Notre Dame are often used to date representations of Montreal. I guess it's sort of like, you know, pre-second tower, post-second tower, because they weren't erected at the same time. I wanted to show this example just because I wanted to, you know, a lot of artwork in churches is anonymous, as we see, you know, oftentimes the paintings are anonymous because they've been brought from one church to another church, you know, across seas from Europe to Canada, or they were brought from old churches into new constructions, like we saw with the last two paintings that we looked at, that were considered to be the oldest paintings in the church that had been brought from the original structure. But one of the other reasons why a lot of the work is anonymous is because a lot of the work was often carried out by like the clergy and by the people who were associated with the church. And oftentimes that were the priests and often the nuns. And that work being done was considered to be work that was done for the church. So it wasn't necessarily, you know, the priests and the nuns who were looking for their signatures to be put on paintings. They were doing it for their love of the church and to help the church look beautiful and more attractive to the churchgoers. So one thing that happens there is that you lose the names of the people who were important, who played important roles in the building of this kind of imagery. So I wanted to bring to light some names that I could find, because it's hard to find names that are associated with these kinds of things sometimes, and especially in old churches. So this is a stained glass that was from a window on the first floor of the nave of Notre Dame, made by the Limoges workshop, François Chigot. and it has a particularity. Instead of representing biblical scenes, they tell important episodes of life in the colony. For example, the stained glass window shows construction of Notre Dame in the main panel. The Virgin Mary is seen above as like to be worshipped in the unfinished building, with one of the bells still being on the ground. So again, this plays into the whole idea of like the bell tower only being erected afterwards. We can see with the imagery of Mary up top in the center, we see one tower fully completed, and then we see the other tower has not been fully completed yet because the bell is still on the ground in front of that tower. So we have some visual metaphor there. And you'll see this in some of the churches in Montreal, like not just in this one in particular, but we'll see in Mary Queen of the World after. There's the imagery that is represented in some of the stained glass windows or some of the paintings are representative of the colony, and not just of allegorical figures in the Bible, but of the representative of the history of Montreal with relation to the Catholic Church as well. So that's interesting. Or in relation, not with relation. So this I felt important to mention too, because in this representation in the stained glass, we have 3 women who played a determining role in the beginning of the colony that are represented in several works and stained glass windows throughout the Basilica. So we have Jeanne Mance in particular. So it was not until 2012 that the city of Montreal officially recognized her as a co-founder on an equal footing with her male counterpart, Paul de Chamarie de Maisonneuve. She is also the founder of the Hotel Dieu and the first lay nurse in Canada, so meaning non-nun. Sainte Marguerite de Bourgeois was the first teacher in the city and the founder of the congregation of Notre Dame de Montréal. And the founder of the Sisters of Charity in Montreal, Sainte Marguerite de Youville, was proclaimed the Mother of Universal Charity in 1959 before becoming in 1990 the first Canadian woman to be canonized. So as far as Catholic feminism goes, this is a pretty cool image of 3 women who had a really major part in Quebec history that we see in in a stained glass window in the church, and representations of them throughout different important buildings in Montreal. But I thought that this stained glass window was a really beautiful display of the 3 of them together, but in their separate roles.
But which one is Jeanne Mance? Jeanne Mance.
Sorry?
You said one of these women is Jeanne Mance? Did you not?
Yeah, so you have Jeanne Mance, and
But
you
which
have
one is-
Marguerite de Bourgeois, and then you have the Sainte Marguerite de Youville. So going from right to left.
But you said she wasn't a nun. Am I looking at the same picture? This is 3 stained glass, right? 3 pictures of 3 stained glass pictures.
Yes.
Okay, and on the right-hand side, there's 2 nuns and then somebody in a bed. Is that the picture?
Yes, Jeanne Mance.
But
She's the
which one is
founder of the
she?
Hotel Dieu.
But you said she wasn't a nun.
The first lay nurse in Canada, excuse me.
But she's in a nun outfit? That's what I'm mixed up.
Maybe the image is mixed up from my side to yours.
I don't
You have
see,
the
I see,
nurse. Sorry, just a minute. You have the nurse on the right-hand side. That's nursing. And then you have the teacher in the middle, and then you have the charity on the left.
Okay, so which woman is Jeanne Mance?
It's represented in that, I don't know if it's the sitting down or if it's the standing up, but the literature says that she was the first lay nurse in Canada. So maybe that was just still the garment that she was wearing. I'm not sure.
Oh, okay, sorry. I thought I didn't understand something. Okay.
No, it's a good question, Diane, because I didn't understand it either, because they do look like nuns, but maybe, as Erin said, that's what they wore, nurses as well, even if they weren't.
It may have been exactly maybe the nurses were wearing that as well, because everybody was kind of wearing the
that's
same thing. It was
cute.
almost a
And those-
uniform.
In those old British movies, everybody's wearing, they look like, okay, we'll let it go. Bye.
Yeah. So, and then also this plaque of Jeanne Mance was sculpted by Montreal artist Alice Nolin, offered by the Association des Grands Gardes Malades, enregistré de la province de Québec, and placed in the basilica. So although the plaque mentions the heart of Jeanne Mance, which should rest under the lamp of Notre Dame, it is not the case. This relic was unfortunately destroyed during a fire at the Hotel Dieu in 1695 when it was temporarily placed in the chapel. So it's commemorating the heart that was supposed to be there, but I thought that it was kind of ironic that it represented something that, I mean, it's meant to be, but it wasn't actually there. But I also wanted to mention this piece just because it's done by it was created by a female artist and a female relief sculptor, which we don't often see. And if you look up her name, Alice Nolan, you'll see that she did relief sculptures on quite a few buildings in and around Montreal. So last of the churches, we have the Mary Queen of the World Cathedral. So the Mary Queen of the World Cathedral, or in full, Mary Queen of the World and St. James the Great Cathedral, is a minor basilica in Montreal, Quebec. Obviously, in Montreal, Quebec, sorry. And it's the seat of the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Montreal, which I did not know. It is the third largest church in Quebec after St. Joseph's Oratory and the Basilica Saint-Anne-de-Beaupré, which is in the east of Quebec. And it's an imitation of St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome. It's topped with statues that were sculpted by Olindo Graton. And the statues are the patron saints of the parishes of Montreal atop where you see them. And they go in order: St. Anthony of Padua, St. Vincent de Paul, St. Hyacinth, St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Paul, St. John, St. James the Greater, St. Joseph, St. John the Baptist, St. Patrick, St. Ignatius, St. Charles, and St. Francis of Assisi. And the way that they chose those saints were apparently each saint, so each parish in that contributed funds to building the cathedral that had like a patron saint name, that patron saint was then erected on the top of the church in commemoration and in thanks. So the construction of the cathedral was ordered by Monsignor Ignace Bourget, second Bishop of Montreal, to replace the former Saint-Jacques Cathedral, which had, surprise, surprise, burned in 1852. Lots of burning churches. His choice to create a scale model of St. Patrick's Basilica in Rome was in response to a rivalry with the Sulpician order, who had been the feudal seigneurs of Montreal, and with the Anglican Church, both of which favored the neo-Gothic style instead. So the site also sparked controversy due to its location in the western part of downtown, in a then predominantly English neighborhood far from the homes of the French Canadian churchgoers. So at first, architect Victor Bourgeot refused the project after studying St. Peter's, saying that it could not be reproduced on a smaller scale. At the time, the Holy See and Papal States were threatened by the nationalist troops of Victor Emmanuel II, King of Piedmont, who was attempting to assert control over all of Italy. The undeterred Bishop Bourget reacted to these events by sending a total of 500 Canadian Zouaves, who were like special forces, to defend the papal territories in Italy, whose names are engraved in gold letters on the marble slabs of the cathedral interior. So around this time, not only was there there were feuds in Europe between Catholic and Protestant and Anglican, so the different religions, but basically the Catholic Church felt threatened, like they didn't have the order over all things religion in Europe, and similar feelings were had in the colonies, and particularly in Montreal. So this was kind of like a flex of power, and a flex of Catholic power to create a smaller version of St. Peter's Basilica as kind of like a little brother to the Basilica in Italy, in Rome. So this is a bénédiction de la première pierre de la nouvelle cathédrale. So work began on the cathedral in 1875, and a new church was consecrated in 1894 at St. James, after St. James the Great, the patron of the parish of the church served. At the time, it was the largest church in Quebec. It was made a minor basilica in 1919 by Pope Benedict XV, and was rededicated in 1955 only to Mary, Queen of the World by Pope Pius VII at the request of Cardinal Paul-Émile Léger. So Cardinal Léger, also a very prominent figure in Montreal history. Between 1955 and 60, several restoration works were executed. And in 2000, the church was designated a National Historic Site. So this shows the people coming out to see the build of the new church. Here you have a view. So what we saw before, so this is like the front facade, and in the back is the dome. So this is the view from outside the dome and the view from inside the dome. And you see, so like the front facade is at the bottom of the cross. And so then you see it makes the shape of the cross going all the way to the back and across the dome. And the dome is in the middle, which is where the altar is, the main altar is. So covering the altar, which is located under the dome, is a neo-Baroque ciborium, which is with twisting columns. So you can see it on the image on the right. You can see it on the bottom left with the twisting columns there. It was created in Rome in 1900 by Joseph Arthur Vincent, and is a reproduction of the one in St. Peter's Basilica by Lorenzo Bernini. So Bernini, very famous Italian sculptor. So this was created after Bernini and then brought over here. It is fully handmade and made with red copper and gold leaf. The angels, garlands, and papal insignia were sculpted between 1910 and 11. And it was a donation to the cathedral by the Sulpicians. Here is a full scale view of the nave. So here we're kind of seeing it from, so the view on the right, we would have been seeing it from underneath the dome going west. And this is from standing at the front facade, looking towards the the front facade, which is north, so looking towards the south, with the altar in the middle. And this is one of those photos again where it's been like oversaturated, but I thought it was a beautiful representation, so I showed it anyway. So the first mass was sung on the banks of the Rivière des Prairies. Oh, excuse me, sorry. And I'm gonna show that image in just a second. But so this is a full scale view of standing from the front door and looking up towards, so you're standing north and looking south again, which is the same thing that you were doing here, but from the front door. So what's interesting is that in a lot of churches, like you have, and cathedrals, basilicas, you have the pews on one side, and like the altar is usually at the end of the wall, like usually up against the wall. But what's interesting here is that the altar is central, so you can sit from multiple sides. Here, sorry, is a representation of the first mass sung on the banks of the Rivière des Prairies by Denis Jamet in June 1615. So that's when it happened. Mounted on canvas and located in the west transept of the cathedral. It recollects ministers giving the first mass. And it's another example of one of imagery inside a Montreal church, not just showing religious representations, but also showing representations of colony life and of bringing Catholicism to the quote unquote new world, which we know now was not a new world, but a new world to them. So just one more quick thing to go through before we get off, because we're finished with the art and with the architecture aspect. But Marie Le Mère des Anges was an Ursuline. She was an Ursuline nun, part of the monastery that came over from Paris, and so born Marie Le Mère and took the name Marie des Anges. She was a very prominent figure with the Ursuline nuns, and here's a portrait of her. And I just wanted to show some of the embroidery work that she did, because this was an exhibition that was given at the Ursuline Museum in Quebec. And her work was incredibly important. If you can see on the top here, it's a photograph of one of her embroidery altar pieces, but you can see the true representation on the bottom, in the bottom photo on the left-hand side. So she created these altar pieces for churches. And like I said, like, you know, a lot of these nurses were unsung heroes of art in churches because they created them to help beautify them, but without signing their names on anything. And oftentimes we're unable to attribute pieces to the women who created them because there is no account, there is no writings of, you know, the fact that they made them, because there is no because they weren't considered important. They may have had written histories of the men who created certain paintings or sculptures, but oftentimes women's accomplishments weren't recorded. So I just wanted to be sure to show some respect to the Ursuline nuns who played a very, very big role in the decoration of churches all across Quebec. And she was, Marie Le Mère des Anges was one of the dominant figures. This is another one of her embroidery pieces. So this one in particular, you can see the close-up here. So this one in particular was done with lace work and silver thread, different color. Sorry, just give me 1 second here. Lace work and silver thread. There are actually little gems embedded in there, and you can see the middle of the flower. There's almost like sequin type work. This is the close up of the left hand side of his body, of Joseph's body. Has anyone ever been to the Ursuline Museum? No? Well, if you go on to again, it's one of those, the Ursuline Museum is one of those, you can go onto the website and you can take a virtual tour, and I encourage you to do it because, again, this type of artwork has been brought to historical museums and not necessarily to art historical or art in general museums, but the artwork that was created by a lot of these Ursuline nuns who were like champions of painting, of drawing, of embroidery, of music, of everything. They are very undersung and underrepresented and undercelebrated, and they need a lot more attention. So I encourage you to go and check it out.
Where is it?
Mom, you just have to go onto the website. The Ursuline Museum is in Quebec, but if you just go onto Ursuline Museum just search Ursuline Museum, Musée Ursulin, and you'll be able to find it. And there's like multiple locations that you can go see in different churches, aside from the general museum, where you can where they have like different artifacts and stuff, but you can travel kind of through it online. You can access different collections and such. Okay. So that is it for the religious architecture and art. Oh, sorry, that was the last slide. That was another detail of it. Just beautiful gold work, gold thread and silver. I feel like Auntie Tanya is loving this work. Next week, we'll be going into post-Confederation painting from 1867 to 1910, and I cut it off at 1910 because that is when before 1910, but is when the Canadian Impressionism starts, and then the Beaver Hall group starts coming together. So I really did Confederation, which was 1867 until 1910, which will give us a visual account of a new country and its inhabitants and people. So we will start that next week. And until then, did anybody have any questions before we sign off? No? Okay, well, thank you all very much. Sorry about the little glitches at the beginning of the slideshow there. If anybody has any questions or comments, you can always email me. Everyone has my email address. And I'm headed off to the Cairo to try and fix my back. But thank you all. Thank you.
Thanks, Erin.
It works.
And thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck with your
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you. And we'll see you
Thank
next
you.
week. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.